Hey folks, welcome to the Google Classroom training and support for this week. This is a new thing that I'll be doing. I'm going to be running these every week. We're going to focus each time on 4 separate content categories, some news and notes and updates from the week, some common questions that I've been getting, and solutions to them. Then we're going to each week have a section on digital content creation, showing you how to do some things differently and tweak things that you may have from the past to work in a digital format. And then I'll have some sort of parting thoughts and access for a feedback form for you guys to submit some requests and questions about anything that you saw in the session. So let's give it a start, and I will see you on the back end. So this week's digital content creation is going to focus on how we can transition old tasks that we might print out as worksheets to a digital format that's usable for students. So I know many people are kind of looking for that. Before we get to that, I'm going to run through some simple news and notes, some updates and whatnot. Some of these are things that may have come out in the newsletter or that I may have sent out individually, but I want to cover them again just to make sure people kind of understand how important and significant these things are to this process being successful. So first, I want to underline the importance of directing people to our website. I'm going to show you some of those pages, but you can see right now the homepage of our website. In the first pane of the website are the 3 links to the most important resources during the closures. So in cases where students are having issues with technology or need support with things, we want to direct them first to the website, which has the documentation provided by the city on how to get further technology support. It's not recommended that we take a bunch of computers in and fix them at our school, so the city will be working to do those remotely. There's a couple other cases, or there's a couple other incidents that have come up this week, so I want to kind of give some direct guidance on each of those. So first, let me show you through some of the pages on the website. All right, so this is the home page. There's 3 main links here. There's the Google Classroom tools for students. This page is particularly useful for students who are not having issues with the computer but may be new to Google Classroom or not know what their username is. So a couple things to point out here. This video is just a short, quick tutorial. This is the same one that was on the Google Classroom that is on the Google Classroom for Beginners class. It's a short introduction for students on the student-facing side of Google Classroom. You'll notice at the top that they can click the link that's in there to go directly to the form to look up their user info, and there's a link there to directly to Google Classroom. So they can look up their Google user info and then head directly over to Google Classroom to test it out. So below that video, there's a couple other resources. There's one quick slide from a slide deck that I created last year that underlines or outlines the structure of these Google user IDs, so students could figure them out on their own. And then underneath that is a form where students can look up their Google user ID using just their ID number. So they can put in their lunch number, their ID number, their student ID number. It will return to them in the box below that their Google username. We left there a reminder of what the password is. It's the same password as the one they used to sign in. And then in pane 1 in this form is the list of classes they're already enrolled in, along with the join codes. And in pane 2, they can actually look up by period code and by teacher name any other class that's registered in Google Classroom. Obviously, if a student reaches out to you and says they're having trouble accessing their classes and whatnot, you can forward the message along to me at support@hscommerce.org. And in many cases, there are things that I can fix on the back end, and then I can report directly to the student when it is fixed. Important thing is to send them to the page if they're having trouble with Google Classroom. Send them to our website. Tell them to go to the Google Classroom Tools for Students page that has everything that they need to access Google Classroom. Secondly, going back to the home page, the second link is to all the tech support help that we are providing during closure. So with this, there's kind of three main categories of issues that we have run into and will continue to run into. First is families who do not have internet access. One thing that I'm going to highlight here, people are aware that some of our students were given hotspots. Those hotspots are given out by Sprint. They're not given out by the city. The city does not have their own bank of hotspots to give out. That is through the private nonprofit run by Sprint, the Sprint 1 Million project. So the city, I know the city is probably talking to them and seeing what else they can do, but right now we do not have hotspots. All the ones given to us at the start of the year for the students that qualified are with those students. So please do not say that that is an option to families and students as you talk to them. The guidance from the city in regards to internet access is two things. First, the Xfinity public access Wi-Fi is free. You do not have to sign in with a Comcast account in order to access it until the end of the closure. And then also there's, from Comcast, they offer this Internet Essentials package. It's $10 a month. There are some limitations, but it's actually a heck of a lot better than a hotspot. And for people that do not have access to the public Xfinity networks, Internet Essentials is a much better solution even than a hotspot. So the other thing that I would say is if you run into families who we give them these guidance, these suggestions, and they don't solve their problem, we can take down their information. And if something else, some other solution emerges, those are folks that we can reach out to regarding that solution. However, at the moment, there are no hotspots. There are no other options than these two options for internet access for our families at home. Okay. So the other piece, the next one that we run into, that students run into, that gets reported a lot, is just issues overall with the laptop, whether it's dead, it's not logging in, something's broken on it, or the internet isn't working. Like maybe the internet at the home they know is working because other devices get on the network, but they're having problems with the computer doing that. So this is the technical support documentation from the city. It's pretty straightforward. In most cases, many of the issues that our students run into are not ones that we will be able to fix. The city has implemented a remote access plan for addressing normal support issues with student devices. So this guide offers all the steps for students to go through. It gives some simple troubleshooting steps if it's not turning on, if they're able to log in, they're having some issues with the device, what to do. And then if they cannot access the device, if they can't get into it, if it's not logging in, it's not connecting to the internet while other devices at their home are, the city is using the Microsoft Teams app to communicate with students and attempt to fix those issues and work more one-on-one with them. That's information on that is page 3 for the English version and page 5 for Spanish version. This is an app that can be installed in a phone. If they can get on the web with another device, they can go and access the app in the web version. The only thing they would need is to sign in with their springfieldpublicschools.com email address, which the information on that is outlined in these instructions. So we want to drive people to this documentation. It's going to save us a heck of a lot of time. We just need them to read through it and follow the steps that are outlined in the document. That is the way that we're offering tech support to students. My role in regards to that is mainly making sure that students have devices and that the devices are working when they leave our door. We will not be doing hands-on support with devices due to the high exposure risk that would cause both for us and our families. The last piece that we've just added in yesterday is if people are on this form and it doesn't address the issues that they may have, and there might be some cases where this is the case, or if they need a laptop, if they didn't get a laptop or they left theirs at school and we closed, they can fill out this form and we will put them on the list. Our goal is to have periodic rollouts of new devices as the demand exists, or for as long as the demand exists, and we're just trying to stagger that in a way to reduce exposure risks. So direct people to the website. Tech support. It's the second link. Now the third thing on the website is really there for you guys. It's a persistent resource for Google Classroom. It's Google Classroom Tools for Teachers. On this page, Immediately under the title, you have a link to the slide deck from the trainings we did last week. Underneath that is a link to some documentation and guidance on apps that you can use to communicate with families without sharing your personal number. And then some videos. I've thrown up some videos on this site. I found this teachers that has done some pretty good videos based on the newest version of the Google Classroom interface. It has changed since last year. That focus on getting started and then how to tweak, change, and improve different parts of the practice with Google Classroom. So I would highly suggest, if you're new, if you're a beginner with Google Classroom, these are some of the best videos to watch. I'm more or less in my sessions going to be addressing the things that people raise to me, but there's going to be some pretty substantive gaps to that because it's going to be based on what people ask for. These videos are really good. They're relatively short and they give you some real things to come out of the session with in order to improve your practice. So I would highly suggest you check out those 4 videos. And then when you're done checking out those videos, go to Google Classroom, play around with it, figure out ways to improve your practice. So in today's digital content creation session, I'm going to show you how to take an old worksheet that had questions and some visuals where you wanted students to, say, label visuals or write annotations in margins or near the visual to mark it up. Now, a task like that doesn't necessarily translate directly well to a digital format because it's very hard to write on a document in any digital format. No platform has really found a good and effective way to do that basically replicates the methods that you would use when doing it on paper. So I'm going to show you how to convert that content into a format that is more usable and more user-friendly for that task. Okay, so we're going to another thing that I'll show you after that is simply, how do you take, say, something that's a worksheet, maybe with some texts or text chunks and questions, and put that into a digital format in a way that makes sense. Okay, so this actually comes from, so the inspiration for today's lesson actually comes from a science task that was shared with me this week, where the teacher wanted to just label some sections of a periodic table. There's another similar task in this, but the solution is really the same. So I'm going to show you how I would do that. Basically, this all starts with Google Slides. So anything that you want to do visually with students, or where you want students to be able to manipulate and label things digitally that involves images, the best way to do that is Google Slides. Okay, so I just created kind of a fake template here. One thing I would suggest when you're using Google Slides is have some sort of template. There's some theming options that are available to you to select from that just make it a little bit more appealing for students, right? So we can come into slide, change theme, and there's a couple different options there. It will default to the basic white theme, which is boring and it's not attractive, so just slide through and pick something that's reasonable. My suggestion would be something that's simple and basic, yet has a little bit of color to keep the audience engaged in that way. So what you might do in a case like this is you could do a couple questions a slide, you could do 1 question a slide, however you want to set it up. I would just put the question in the title box, and then you can type it in, question 1, whatever the question is. And then when it's time to come to a visual, let's say this would be question 3. And in this case, we want to ask students to label the periodic table groups. So in a periodic table, there's different groups of elements that has to do with the properties of those elements. We want students to identify the different groups and what their names are. So there's a couple ways to do this. First, you can, and I'm going to show you, there's probably 3 overall ways. So you actually want to start with inserting the image you want to label. So you can insert image directly from Google Slides. You can search the web, and you can find what you're looking for. So in this case, I'm going to look for periodic elements group, and I'm going to add transparent to the end because I want to get an image that is transparent and it's not going to affect the look of my slides. Now some of these are labeled. We might go with one of these. That's totally up to you. That's one way you can search directly in Google. I find you get a little bit better results when you actually search on a separate window, still using Google image search, but search in a separate window. So I'm going to take this image right here. Now whenever you do an image search outside of Google Slides or Google Docs, you can just right click when you find the image, right click and copy image, and then we can come back and paste it. Okay, so keep in mind that if it's a smaller image, when you scale it up, it might get a little bit fuzzy. You can kind of see that starting to happen with this image, but that's an option to use. Another option that you could use is you should be able to also insert it as a background. So say I wanted to use this image as a background. There's really one benefit to that. If you use it as a background, it's less likely students will accidentally delete that image. Right? So if you right click, save image as, okay, we're just going to save it to my downloads. Then I'm going to come back to my slides. I'm going to choose image and browse, and there we go. We'll pull that up. Okay, and let's give that a shot. So we're going to say done. Actually, you can delete this original one. Now, the one thing that you'll notice with this is that it will fill up the whole page. So, you know, if you're using an image like this, it's probably better to go with the way that I had previously set it up. You see, it's a little bit stretched, it's a little bit wonky to work with, but that is an option. You can insert it as the background. I'm just going to undo that so that we can get back to what we can work with. So, the best way to then create a space or a template for students to go in and label stuff on an image is really to use text boxes. So let's say we wanted to label the green ones. We could put a label here as a text box and say green, and then something like this, maybe replace with actual name. Okay, so we might do that. Now, a few other suggestions if you were to do this. You want to come up to the top and probably just slap a couple pixel, just a border on that box so that students can easily see it. Okay, so let me go and create boxes for each one of these sections, and then we'll come back with what it looks like at the end. Okay, so a couple of things I learned while doing this, I didn't really learn, but that I figured out probably make this a lot easier is, you know, you can, once you create one text box, you can copy and paste it, and you can change the shape. You just click on the border of the box, and then you can move it around. So you don't have to like create a new text box every single time and then go and set the border values. You can do that once, and then just copy and paste that text box. The other thing, because this visual is color coordinated, and we wanted students to label things based on the coordination with the color ranges as outlined in the initial graphic, so I just changed the background color value for the text box. The way to do that is just click on the text box, then you're going to click on the fill color icon. It looks like a tipping paint bucket, and then you're given some of the options there. So that's a way to do it too, just to make it easier for students to do that setting, and then also for you when you go back and edit it, you'll be able to easily see, even if they happen to say move some of the boxes around, which one's supposed to match up with which, right? So that's one way to do it. Now you can use that same text box format for any other things, like you don't necessarily need to have colors involved. The only thing I would suggest is anytime you put in a text box is that you give a value to those borders to make it easier for students to see where that text box is. I think it's useful to create it for them because some of our students won't necessarily know how to do it, and that just saves you having to answer a question from a student ahead of time. You know, if we can put it there ahead of time for something that's a functional thing, we'd rather those questions be about the actual content and not about how to do something if we can set that up for them. Okay, so now I also want to show you an example of a template that comes from one of my classes previously. that just shows a basic how to, or just a basic example of something that could be used to replace a standard text and question document. So say you have a reading that you have some questions on. If you're looking at doing this in a digital format, my suggestion would be, to whatever extent possible, to pair the text with the questions that you're asking about that section of the text. Now maybe you might do this by reading chunks or whatever is reasonable. That's okay too. However you chunk this, I would suggest you kind of integrate your questions with the texts that will help students answer them. So here's an example, 2 excerpts from Vindication of the Rights of Women from the French Revolution by Mary Wollstonecraft. I was getting into practice at the time of doing some pre-fed sort of word banks, some vocabularies. These are kind of like your tier 2, tier 3 vocabs. And just doing some comparative words for them. We focused a lot in this on the specific language that was used, so that was even more important with that process, or to that process, and helping students kind of figure out what the meaning of this text was and what Wollstonecraft was saying. But here's an example of just pairing. Putting in line counts is useful too if you want students to reference things. But just integrating the two. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can use tables. So let me just show you. If you do insert table, that gives you kind of a structure where you can put things into the document in a bit more controlled fashion. You could have a chunk of text, and you could use just like one cell underneath that. Insert table and just one cell where they type their answer into. There's a couple different ways to do it. I would just say explore that as best as you can and see what works for you and for the task that you're giving to students. I would always say, like, create a space in the document itself for students to do the task that you're asking them to do, and with that also minimizing the amount of attachments that you have on a file is super helpful. So in the case of texts and text-dependent questioning, find ways to integrate both the text source and the questions together, ideally in a way that best fits what you're trying to achieve for your students. Okay, so those are a couple examples of how we can tweak old assignments that we might print out to more of a digital format. Some of them can actually work pretty well. In fact, this example I'm showing you is also something more or less the same as the version that we would print out. My suggestion would be to take some time soon and thumb through the assignments you're looking at for next week to see what you can do to tweak, change, or improve it for students. Okay, so I want to show you guys one more thing, just adding this in here, and this is how to use Google Meet. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this. There's actually 3 ways I'm going to show you. There's an ad hoc way. You can schedule it in your calendar, and then you can also actually create a Meet link for each of your Google Classrooms. So I'm going to show you how to do all 3 of those today, and hopefully you can find a way that works for you and meets what you want to do. Okay, so we'll start with the simple ad hoc fashion. Now, if you just say you're starting your office hours and you wanted to open a Google Meet session just for students to be able to talk directly with you, this is how you could do it. Okay, so you would go to meet.google.com. It's going to load up this page. Now, hopefully you're signed into your hscommerce.org account. You'll be able to see that in the upper right-hand corner. And you would just click Join or Start a Meeting. You'll need to create some type of nickname. And once you do that, it's going to bring you to this page. Okay? This is just to check to make sure that your camera is working and all the audio stuff is there. Then you'd hit Join Now. And it's going to give you some copying info. So all you'd want to do to be able to share that with your class is to click Copy Joining Info. It's going to copy it to your clipboard. And then you can come back to your Google Classrooms. And if you wanted to share it with all your classes, you could go into any of the classes on your panel and just go straight into a stream post. If we wanted to select all of our classes, we can click Under 4, we can click and select all the classes that we want, and we can type in something like this. Okay, and once you put that in there, all I did was copy and paste. You could right click and paste, or just Control V to paste the information that you copied from over here. I think the most important thing to highlight is that once you open this ad hoc session, do not close it. If you close it, it will likely reset and reuse that link for somebody else. So just be aware that that happens when you do it in an ad hoc method. Now the next way to do this is actually to create this in Google Calendar. So say, let's say tomorrow I had office hours. I can go to calendar.google.com. I can type, click on the date. I can type in all the details of my event. I'm going to call it office hours. You can set the date and time. Okay. You want to click more options. This is going to expand out the editor, and all you want to do is this add conferencing drop down. So under the location, you'll have an option that says add conferencing. You can click Hangouts Meet. It's going to generate that link. Now this link is always going to work. It's going to always work. Okay, this link is reserved for that particular event. So what's different between this and the ad hoc session is that this link will always be there and you'll always be able to use it. Okay, so I click Join Now. It's got me in here. Okay. In the meeting details in the bottom left-hand corner, you can copy the joining info and you can post it. Now you could also, if you wanted to, you could also start typing in your class names, and it's going to pull up your Google Classroom names, and you can start to add those as guests to the calendar event. Okay. I'm not quite sure what that looks like or how that looks like in the classroom. From my understanding, that means it will appear in the Google Calendar for those students. It might not necessarily appear in the classroom, but at the very least, you'll be able to invite them that way. They will get an email notification about the event, and even beyond that, you can still do the same thing of copying that joining info and pasting it into your classes like we mentioned earlier. Now, with this function, you can schedule ahead that post. It looks like if you select more than one class, you're not able to schedule it ahead, but just keep that in mind as you're choosing your different options. My suggestion would be to either use the calendaring method or to use this next method. Now this third way of doing it is particularly helpful if you have, say, all of your content the same and potentially all of your classes in one Google Classroom. Now if that's something that you'd want to do, if you'd want to combine all, say you have 6 sections of the same course, if they're going to be on the same content and you actually would prefer that they be one class, just let me know. That's pretty easy to transition. It only takes a little bit of work for me to do that. We didn't do things that way by default because it would have taken a little bit longer to do. We wanted to get people in and started. But let me show you how you can create an individual Meet link for each class. Now, if you, again, have 6 classes or 5 classes, if you have different sections, if they're set up as different classrooms in Google, this would not be using the same link for all of those classes. It would be creating a reserved Google Meet link for each individual class. So just bear that in mind. Basically, all you do to create these Meet links that would then be assigned to your classroom is you go into the classroom page, you click on the gear in the upper right, and you scroll down to your general settings. Now by default this is probably turned off, but you just want to turn on that switch, and let me see if I can find a class that doesn't have a Google Meet link in it yet so that I can drop that in. Okay, so if I come in here, gear, scroll down, you want to click Generate Meet Link. Now that Meet link will be reserved for your class. You'll notice it looks a little bit different than the ones that we generated in the ad hoc session or in our calendar. Then you just click Save, And you'll notice that that link will appear in the header at the top. Well, folks, that's a wrap for this week's session. I hope that video gave you some tools and tips that will help make things a little bit easier for you as you plan for Google Classroom going forward. A couple of the things I'm going to drop in. I had to cut a section out of this week's video that explored some external applications and other things that connect and work really well with Google Classroom to both make things easier for us as teachers and give us some more actionable and usable data, as well as make things a little bit more interactive and interesting for students. I'm going to include a link to that in the description of the video, so please check that out if you feel like you're ready to start to look at other things that you might add into your class. That's something I'm going to explore more in depth in next week's video. Also, please make sure we're directing students and families to the school website as the first stop for questions in need, requests for support, anything to do with Google Classroom or technology, because 80 to 90% of the questions are going to be answered in what's on that site. Any other requests can be forwarded to support@hscommerce.org. So please keep working those phones and see that we can do the best that we can do for our students and families during this closure. And before you leave this session, please click on the link at the top of the video and give us some feedback on this week's content. Please also click the subscribe button below. You should get notifications of new videos as we post these going forward. And feel free to leave any comments or suggestions in the comments below. I will be checking them and seeing and hopefully replying as best as I can. So stay safe, folks, and I will see you next week.